The cab stopped at a familiar porch with peeling white paint, and I slowly made my way out onto the brick-paved walkway. The driver silently helped me with my black bag, an older man with kind, tired eyes who had remained tactfully silent all the way from the cemetery, realizing that words of comfort were inappropriate. His silence was grateful to me. $22, he said quietly, glancing at the meter. I handed him $25 from my black wallet. He wanted to give me change, but I shook my head. The driver nodded understandingly and said carefully, "Sincerely sorry for your loss, ma'am. Hold on tight." "Thank you for your kindness," I replied, taking the bag from his hands. The car slowly pulled away, leaving me alone in front of the house where I had lived serenely for 40 long years. Daytona Beach greeted me with the familiar salty smell of the ocean wind and the distant monotonous sound of the surf. But today, even those sounds, familiar from childhood, didn't bring the familiar comfort. Everything around me reminded me of Frank, the neat bed of red roses he tended every weekend, and the old wooden swing on the veranda where we spent warm evenings. The keys were suddenly stuck in the old lock, and I turned them harder, the mechanism yielding with the familiar metallic creak. Frank had been meaning to oil it for a month, always putting it off until the weekend. Now there would be no one to do it. The heavy oak door opened with a creak, and I was greeted by the unusual silence of an empty house. In the small hallway, I carefully removed my black patent shoes and hung my dark coat in an old wooden closet. On the round table by the mirror lay yesterday's newspapers. They had been brought in the evening by Mr. Harris, a kind neighbor, when he learned of Frank's sudden death from mutual acquaintances. Good people live all around us, but their participation and concern do not make the grief any less. A loss remains a loss. Slowly she walked into the spacious living room, with large windows overlooking the garden, and suddenly froze in surprise. Crystal, my 34-year-old sister-in-law, stood at the polished dark wood coffee table, hastily shoving some documents into her expensive leather bag, clearly nervous. When she heard my leisurely footsteps on the parquet floor, she turned around sharply. A strange expression flashed across her always immaculately made-up face that I might well have called guilty if I hadn't known my sister-in-law well enough in those 8 years. "Oh, Rose, you're home already," she said hurriedly as she continued to nervously fasten the metal clasp of her bag. I noticed that her usually confident fingers, with perfect French manicures, were visibly trembling. "I just came by to see if everything was okay here, while you were gone." Crystal looked flawless, as she always did under any circumstances. Her platinum hair was neatly styled in an elaborate updo, her professional makeup applied perfectly despite the early hour, her beige designer dress sitting perfectly on her slender figure. In her 34 years, she was perfectly able to look after her own appearance and make the right impression. Today, she wore new high stiletto heels. I'd noticed them right away because they cost a lot of money, which the young family of a computer programmer and a beautician didn't have much of. "Thank you for taking care of the house," I replied in as even a voice as possible, setting the black suede purse carefully on the soft couch. "Where's Bradley now? I thought he'd be home on a day like this." "He has a very important work meeting with customers." Crystal, visibly nervous, fixed her flawless hair, looking away. "You know programmers work without a day off. He's terribly worried about Grandpa Frank, but they have a project due today." Grandpa Frank, that's what she called him, even though she'd only known him for 8 years. My husband hated that surname, but he never corrected her, telling her she shouldn't ruin the family relationship over nothing. Now I understood. He just didn't want to quarrel with his only son's wife. "I see," I said, sinking into my favorite chair by the window. "Work is more important than family." That's the thing about Bradley. Even on the day of his father's funeral, he'd found a reason not to be around. But Crystal's behavior alarmed me far more than her son's absence. She usually kept an emphatically polite but cold demeanor with me, and today I could hear the tension in her voice that she was clearly trying to hide. "If you need anything, be sure to call," Crystal said, heading for the exit with wide strides. "We're always here to help." She stopped at the door and turned around as if she wanted to add something, but only gave a curt nod and walked out. The door closed with a quiet click that echoed through the empty house. I was alone in the living room, which suddenly seemed huge and empty. I sank deeper into the chair and tried to collect my thoughts. The funeral had been hard. Too many people, too many condolences, too many catchphrases about what a wonderful man my husband had been. I knew that without hearsay. Now, in the silence of my own home, the grief came over me with renewed force. Frank had gone so suddenly that I still couldn't believe it. The heart attack had happened right in the garden, near his favorite rose bushes, which he had planted with his own hands 15 years before. His neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, found him an hour later when she came to borrow garden shears for her petunias. The doctor said he died instantly, without agony. That should have been comforting, but it wasn't. 45 years of happy marriage came to an end one Saturday morning. We met in college in Orlando, both of us studying accounting and dreaming of our own home by the ocean. Frank was a serious young man with neat dark hair and honest brown eyes who never made hasty decisions and was always thinking ahead. I fell in love with his calmness and reliability, qualities our son lacked. He never raised his voice, never spent money on nonsense, always planned ahead. After we were married, we bought this house for $20,000, which seemed like a lot of money at the time. Frank worked for a big accounting firm, and I did the housekeeping and helped him with the reports in the evenings. When Bradley was born, I had to leave my job for a few years, but then I returned to my profession. We saved every dollar, planned, dreamed of traveling in retirement and babysitting grandchildren. Retirement came, and the dreams remained dreams. Frank was diagnosed with diabetes, then began having serious heart problems. Instead of romantic cruises to Europe, we went to doctors and specialists. There were no grandchildren either. Crystal was adamant that she didn't want children, saying they would ruin her figure. And now Frank was gone too. She got up from her chair and slowly walked over to Frank's massive desk in the corner of the living room. This oak desk had been inherited from his father, and it was where my husband sorted through the mail every day, planned the family budget, and kept all the important documents neatly organized. I pulled out the top drawer with brass handles and immediately saw that something was wrong. The papers were not in the order Frank had left them. My husband was a pedant to the core and always arranged his papers in strict order. Utility bills on the left, bank statements on the right, insurance policies in a separate signed folder. Now everything was chaotically jumbled, as if someone had been hurriedly searching for something specific, not caring to put things back where they belonged. I opened the second drawer with the familiar creak of old wood. Here, too, there was complete disarray, completely atypical of my neat husband. Several envelopes with bank logos had been carelessly opened and tucked back in. Important documents were lying at the bottom of the drawer, and a thick folder with papers for the house was not in its usual place on the right side. Strange and very disturbing. Frank would never in his life have left his sacred desk like this, and after his sudden death, no one was supposed to rummage through here without my personal permission. At any rate, I had never given such permission to anyone. I walked over to the antique mahogany sideboard against the opposite wall, where we traditionally kept the most important family documents and valuables. Someone had obviously been here with bad intentions. The envelopes of documents were not in the strict alphabetical order in which I remembered them clearly. One of them, labeled Home Original Documents, was ajar, though I remembered exactly how I'd taped it shut 2 weeks ago after another visit to the bank. My heart sped up. throbbing unpleasantly in my temples. What exactly was Crystal doing here while I was gone? What was she so insistently searching through our personal documents? And more importantly, why was she so nervous and in such a hurry to leave as soon as she saw me? Her strange, fidgeting, and trembling hands took on a different, much more sinister meaning. I returned to the desk and methodically went through all the drawers, scrutinizing every folder and envelope. The bottom drawer, which Frank always kept under a small brass lock and where the most important papers were kept, was obviously missing something serious. The lock had been carefully picked, apparently with a thin, sharp object, perhaps a clerical knife or screwdriver. Usually there was a thick blue folder with gold embossing and a neatly labeled House Property Documents. It contained the originals of all the important papers on our property, including the original purchase contract of 1984 and all subsequent re-registrations. The folder was gone now, and only the less important documents remained in the drawer. I sat down on the edge of the couch and tried to remember the last time I'd seen this critical folder. A month ago, when Frank and I renewed our home insurance against fire and natural disasters. My husband pulled the folder out of the locked drawer. We carefully went through all the paperwork together. Then he carefully tucked it back in its place and, as always, locked the drawer with a small key. Now the lock was broken, the folder with the original documents had disappeared without a trace, and Crystal had definitely been to my house for some nefarious purpose. Just a coincidence? Highly unlikely, but why would my daughter-in-law want the deed to our family home? And most importantly, what right did she have to take them without my knowledge and consent? I knew the answer to that question. She had no right and could not. The house was jointly owned by Frank and me, and the will was in my name only. Crystal wasn't mentioned in the deed at all. The will said that all of our property would go to Bradley only after I died, but that was still a long way off, since I was in my right mind. I picked up the phone and dialed my son's number. The phone buzzed for a long time, then the familiar answering machine came on. Bradley's voice sounded strained and formal. "Hi, this is Brad. I can't come to the phone right now. Please leave a message after the beep." "Bradley, it's Mom," I said after a nasty beep. "Call me as soon as you're free. It's really important, and it can't wait." I hung up the phone and thought about it, looking out the window at the garden where Frank had spent the last minutes of his life. Something serious was happening in my own home while I was burying my beloved husband, something that was causing my sister-in-law to secretly go through our personal records and steal crucial real estate papers. The morning came gray and rainy, which completely matched my mood. I woke up early, about 6 in the morning, although I had gone to bed late the night before and couldn't sleep for a long time. Thoughts of Crystal's strange behavior and the missing documents kept running through my head like an annoying melody. The coffee tasted bitter and unpalatable. I must have used too many ground beans, or I'd forgotten how to make it for one person. After a breakfast of oatmeal and buttered toast, I decided to go through Frank's paperwork thoroughly. If Crystal had really stolen something, I needed to know exactly what it was. Maybe I was wrong, and the important papers were just lying around somewhere else. My heart told me it was far worse than that, though. I started at the desk, methodically going through every folder and envelope. Frank had always been an organized man, but in their 45 years together, he'd accumulated a huge amount of paperwork. There were old tax returns from the last 7 years, utility bills, medical certificates, car and home insurance policies, and bank statements. Gradually, the picture became clearer, and I was not happy about it. Indeed, not only were the original house documents from the blue folder missing, but several other important papers had disappeared as well. There was no Frank's will. He kept the original in the same locked drawer. Gone was the folder of bank records that held the contracts for all of our accounts and deposits. The small brown folder with the car papers was also missing, although we had sold the car a year ago for Frank's health reasons. What particularly alarmed me was that missing were copies of all the powers of attorney that Frank and I had executed for each other for various occasions in our lives. These documents allowed each of us to act on our spouse's behalf at banks, hospitals, and government offices. Why would Crystal need these particular papers? The longer I studied the remaining documents, the more convinced I became that the theft had been purposeful and deliberate. They hadn't taken everything, but only the most important ones, the ones related to property, finances, and legal authority. Someone knew very well where and what was in our house. By 10 o'clock in the morning, I had compiled a detailed list of the missing documents. There were 12 items, including the original will, the house title, bank contracts, and powers of attorney. It was more than enough to make my life very difficult if the documents fell into the wrong hands. I picked up the phone and dialed Bradley's number again. This time he answered after the third beep, but his voice sounded irritated and hurried. Mom, hi, I'm really busy right now. We have a meeting in 5 minutes. What's up? Bradley, I need to have a serious talk with you. Some important documents went missing from the house yesterday. What documents? What are you talking about? I caught a strange note in his voice. Not surprise, but more like tension. Like he already knew what he was going to talk about. The deeds to the house, my father's will, the bank contracts. Someone broke into Dad's desk and took the most important things. A long pause followed. I could hear Bradley breathing into the receiver, and I thought he was thinking intensely about something. Mom, are you sure? Maybe Daddy moved them somewhere else? You know he's been a little absent-minded. Scattered? Frank? My husband kept a clear mind and iron discipline until his last days. He never misplaced important documents. Bradley, the lock on the drawer is broken. It's not absent-mindedness, it's theft. And I suspect Crystal did it. What? Mom? How can you say that? Crystal would never. I caught her in the house yesterday with papers in her hands. She was nervous and in a hurry to leave. She was checking to see if everything was okay. That's perfectly normal given the circumstances. Bradley spoke too heatedly, too emotionally defending his wife. He was usually more reserved, especially when it came to family disagreements. Then explain to me why she needed the deeds to our house? Mom, I don't know what you're talking about. No one took anything. Maybe you're just looking in the wrong place? Bradley, I've lived in this house for 40 years, and I know where every piece of paperwork is. The papers were stolen, and I want to know why. Look, I really can't talk right now. I have a presentation in a few minutes. Clients are already in the office. We'll discuss it tonight, okay? No, it's not okay. It can't wait until tonight. Mom, please, I understand that you're upset about Dad's death, but you shouldn't look for culprits where there are none. Maybe you need to get some rest. Take a sedative. A sedative? Did he think I was hysterical? I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Bradley, I'm of sound mind and good judgment. The documents were stolen, and I need your help to get them back. Okay. I'll come over to your place after work today and we'll talk it over. But right now, I have to go. What time are you coming over? I'm not sure exactly. Maybe 7, maybe 8. It's a very busy day. Bradley, Mom, I really have to run. Goodbye. He hung up without letting me finish my sentence. I stared at the phone for a few seconds, trying to figure out what had happened. My son, who was usually attentive and involved, especially in difficult moments, was acting strange and evasive. He wasn't surprised by the disappearance of the documents. He wasn't outraged. He didn't offer to come over immediately and sort it all out. Instead, he tried to convince me that I was wrong. I returned to the desk and scrutinized the broken lock once more. The marks on the metal were fresh. The lock had been picked recently, probably yesterday. Whoever did it had acted carefully and knew what they were looking for. This was not a random theft, but a targeted operation. I went to the window and looked at the house next door where Mrs. Patterson lived. Perhaps she had seen something yesterday? The old lady spent a lot of time at the window watching what was going on in the neighborhood. It wasn't in my nature to talk to neighbors about family problems, but circumstances forced me to. I threw on a light jacket and left the house. It was drizzling outside, and I wished I'd brought an umbrella. The path to the Patterson house was slippery with wet leaves, and I stepped carefully on the familiar stones. Mrs. Patterson opened the door at once, as if she had been expecting my visit. She was a full, gray-haired woman of about 75, the widow of a math teacher who had moved to our neighborhood 15 years ago. We maintained good neighborly relations, but were never close friends. "Oh, Rose, honey, how are you doing? How are you holding up?" "Thank you, Doris. May I come in? There's something I need to find out." Of course, of course. Come in. I was just making tea." Doris's living room smelled of lavender and old books. She sat me down in a soft armchair and fussily brought me tea and cookies. "Doris, I was wondering, did you notice anything unusual outside our house yesterday while I was away?" The old lady perked up. Apparently, the opportunity to share her observations pleased her. "Oh, yes, dear. Saw your sister-in-law arrive this morning. Beautiful car she has. So shiny. She stayed quite a while. About 2 hours, I guess. And then she left just before you got back." 2 hours? Crystal said she was just checking on the house. What's there to check on for 2 whole hours? And no one else came by? No, just her. Although, wait, yes, there was also some man in a dark sedan. It was already in the evening after you got back. He didn't stay long, about 20 minutes. Did you see him? What did he look like? Unfortunately, no. It was already dark and he parked far away from the street light. But the car was expensive. I could see that. An evening visitor. That could have been important. Maybe Crystal was meeting someone, handing over stolen documents. Thank you, Doris. You've been very helpful. What's wrong, honey? Is something wrong? I didn't want to spread about family problems, but a small part of the truth could be told. Some of Frank's important papers are missing. I'm trying to figure out what happened. Oh my God, have you contacted the police? Not yet. I want to figure it out on my own first. Doris nodded sympathetically and walked me to the door. The rain intensified, and I quickly ran back to my house. The information about the evening visitor added new colors to an already disturbing picture. At home, I picked up my papers again, this time studying what was left. In one of the folders, I found copies of bank statements for the past 3 months. The numbers made me even more wary. There was a lot more money in the family account than I thought, almost $400,000. Frank had always been secretive about finances and had never told me the exact amount of our savings. $400,000, more than enough to give anyone bad thoughts. Especially a young couple who were always complaining about not having enough money and asking for loans. The evening dragged on slowly. Bradley didn't show up, even though the time had long since passed 8. I tried to call him several times, but the phone was unavailable. At 10:30, I finally realized that my son had deceived me and wasn't coming. The next day began with the doorbell ringing around 10 in the morning. I was just finishing my second coffee, trying to chase away my anxious thoughts about the missing documents and my son's strange behavior. Through the window in the door, I saw an unfamiliar middle-aged man in a business suit with a briefcase in his hands. He looked like a typical office worker or insurance agent. "Mrs. Campbell, I'm David Harris of Harris and Associates Real Estate," he introduced himself, holding out a business card. "I have the paperwork for you on the sale of your house." I stared at him, not sure what he was talking about. What sale? What paperwork? No one was going to sell my house. I'm sorry, but there's some kind of mistake. My house is not for sale, I said, not inviting him in. David Harris looked puzzled. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder of papers. But I have all the necessary paperwork, a power of attorney from you to sell, a signed purchase agreement, a consent to the transaction. The buyer has already put down a deposit of $50,000. The world around me seemed to turn upside down. A power of attorney from me? A signed contract? I'd never signed anything like that, and I certainly hadn't authorized anyone to sell my house. Show me those documents, I said, trying to remain calm. Harris held out several sheets to me. I took them with trembling hands and studied them. On the first page was my signature on a power of attorney dated the day before yesterday, the day I'd buried my husband. According to the document, I supposedly entrusted one Crystal Campbell with the authority to sell my real estate. It's a forgery, I whispered, looking at my supposedly own signature. I never signed that document. I'm sorry, ma'am, but we have a notarized copy, and all formalities have been observed. I turned the page and saw the notary's seal. James R. Morrison. The name didn't tell me anything. The date of the notarization was the same day I buried Frank. It turns out, while I was standing at my husband's grave, someone was signing the papers to sell the house on my behalf. Mr. Harris, I was at my husband's funeral that day. I have witnesses. The whole town can attest that I was at the cemetery, not the notary's office. The realtor looked increasingly embarrassed. He nervously adjusted his tie and looked into his papers. But I have all the paperwork. Crystal Campbell gave us a power of attorney and assured us she was acting on your behalf. She said you wanted to sell the house because of financial difficulties after your husband died. Crystal is my sister-in-law, and she has no rights to my house, I said, feeling the anger building. This is fraud, pure and simple fraud. Oh my God, Harris muttered, leafing through the paperwork. If this is true, I need to contact the buyer immediately and put the deal on hold. It was at that moment that my cell phone made the sound of an incoming message. I automatically glanced at the screen and saw the message from Crystal. What I read made me go cold. Goodbye, silly old woman. I hope you enjoy living in the nursing home. The money for the house is already in our account. Don't try to find us. We're a long way from here. Kay. I reread the message several times, not believing my eyes. Not only had my sister-in-law stolen my house, but she was also bullying me. Stupid old woman was what she called me. After 8 years of supposedly being a family, after all the holidays we'd spent together, after all the help Frank and I had given them. Mrs. Campbell, are you all right? You look very pale, Harris asked worriedly. I showed him the message. The realtor read it and whistled. This is a serious crime. You need to contact the police immediately. Yes, I know, I replied, putting the phone away. But first I want to scrutinize all these documents. May I keep copies? Of course, ma'am, and I'll contact the buyer right away to explain the situation. Fortunately, the money hasn't been transferred in full yet, just the deposit. Harris left me a folder with copies of all the documents and hurried away, clearly alarmed at the possible legal ramifications. I closed the door and leaned my back against it, trying to realize the magnitude of the disaster. My house had been sold. My own daughter-in-law has ripped me off and is taunting me. My son, judging from yesterday's conversation, either knows nothing or is in on the scam. The money has already been wired into their account, and they, according to Crystal, have absconded. I walked to the living room and sat down at the table, spreading out all the paperwork in front of me. I needed to figure out the details of the fraud, figure out exactly how it was done. Maybe there would be some clues that would help recover the stolen goods. The forged power of attorney was done very professionally. My signature was reproduced with amazing accuracy. The fraudsters must have had a role model. Most likely, they used one of the documents they stole from my dad's desk. There were a lot of papers with my signature on them. I was particularly interested in the notary, James R. Morrison. His seal looked quite official, his address listed in a neighboring town, an hour's drive from Daytona Beach. Either this man was involved in fraud or someone had forged his seal and documents. The sales contract is for $350,000. This is significantly less than the market value of my house, which, according to the last appraisal, was worth about $500,000. Apparently, Crystal was in a hurry and agreed to a lower price for the sake of a quick deal. The buyer was listed as one Richard Thompson, Orlando address, phone and all contact info is listed. I wonder if this man knew he was buying a stolen house. Or was he also a victim of fraud? I scrutinized all the signatures and stamps. In addition to my forged signature, Crystal's signature appeared on the documents as a trustee. I knew her handwriting well. She often signed family holiday cards. The signature was real, there was no doubt about it. It meant that Crystal was personally involved in the transaction, not just stealing the documents and handing them off to someone else. She'd traveled to the notary herself, met with the buyer herself, signed the contract herself. A whole criminal operation, carefully planned and executed. But there was something about this story that confused me. Crystal worked as a cosmetologist in a beauty salon. Her education and experience had nothing to do with legal issues or real estate. How could she have the knowledge to pull off such a complex scam? Forging documents, finding a buyer, closing the deal. All of this required professional skills. She probably had an accomplice, someone with real estate or legal experience. Perhaps the same evening visitor Mrs. Patterson had seen. I picked up my phone again and reread Crystal's mocking message. "We're a long way from here," meaning they'd really escaped. But to where? And for how long? They had $350,000 now, enough to start a new life anywhere. But what struck me most was not the theft itself, but the tone of the message. Anger, contempt, outright hatred. Stupid old woman. Was that really how Crystal had treated me all these years? Was this disgust lurking behind the polite mask? I remembered all our dinners together, holidays, family trips. Crystal had always been a little cold, a little aloof, but I'd put that down to shyness or generational differences. Now I realized she just hated me and only tolerated me for the sake of her future inheritance. What about Bradley? Did my own son really know about my wife's plans? His behavior yesterday now took on new meaning. The reluctance to talk seriously, the attempts to convince me I was wrong, the references to being busy, all of it could have been an attempt to buy time while Crystal finalized the con. But part of me refused to believe Bradley was capable of such a betrayal. Yes, he was weak-willed. Yes, completely subservient to his wife. But stealing from his own mother? Did money mean more to him than family? I put the papers in a neat stack and put them in the safe Frank had installed in the bedroom years ago. Those papers were now the only evidence of the fraud. Without them, I couldn't prove anything to the police or in court. Then I sat down at my phone and started gathering information. The first thing I had to do was check out a notary public, James R. Morrison. I found his contacts online and called his office. "Notary Morrison's office speaking." A female voice answered. "Good afternoon. My name is Rose Campbell, and I'd like to verify information about the document that was notarized with you the day before yesterday." "One second, I'll check the records." "What date and what document?" I gave the date and described the power of attorney. The receptionist was silent for a while, apparently studying the records. "That's odd," she finally said. "We have no record of such a document being certified on the date in question. Mr. Morrison wasn't working that day at all. He had a family trip to Miami. So the notarization was forged too. Crystal and her accomplices forged not only my signature, but also the notary's seal. This turned simple fraud into a serious federal offense. After calling the notary's office, I sat in silence for a while, trying to comprehend the magnitude of the crime I had been victimized by. Document forgery, false notarization, identity theft. This went far beyond the usual family fraud. I definitely needed professional legal help, and I knew who to turn to. Patricia Cole had been an attorney for over 30 years, and we had been friends since my days at the accounting firm of Johnson and Associates. Back then in the 80s, she was a young lawyer just beginning her career, and I was helping her sort through the financial statements of her first clients. Over the years, she had become one of the most respected civil litigation attorneys in the county, but our friendship remained. I dialed her office number, hoping she could see me today. The receptionist said Patricia's schedule was tight, but when I explained that the case was urgent and involved a serious fraud, I was given a 4 o'clock appointment. With a few hours to go before the meeting, I decided to make good use of that time. First, I made a detailed timeline of events, from the day Frank died to the realtor's visit today. Every detail could be important to the case. Then I gathered all the documents Patricia could use: copies of the forged papers Harris had left behind, bank statements, Frank's will, the only copy I had left, old deeds to the house that were lying around elsewhere. Fortunately, not all the important papers were kept in Dad's desk. At 4:30, I arrived at Patricia's office by cab. The Cole and Associates law firm building was in downtown Daytona Beach, a modern glass skyscraper overlooking the ocean. Patricia was successful and could afford a prestigious address. The receptionist escorted me to a spacious office on the 7th floor. Patricia rose from behind a massive oak desk and gave me a hug. She was 58 years old, but she looked younger than her years, thanks to regular exercise and skillful makeup. Her gray hair was neatly cut in a businesslike style, and her strict navy blue suit emphasized professionalism. "Rose, darling, I'm so sorry about Frank. He was a wonderful man," she said, settling me into the padded chair across the table. "Tell me what happened. On the phone? Did you talk about the fraud?" I detailed the whole story to her, from Crystal's discovery of the house to the realtor's visit today. Patricia listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions and making notes in her notebook. When I finished the story, she shook her head. "Oh my God, Rose, this is a most serious crime. Real estate fraud, falsifying documents, identity theft. You could face jail time for all of it." "Can I get my house back?" I asked, holding out the file folder to her. "We'll see," Patricia replied, opening the folder. "We need to examine all the papers in detail first." She pulled out a magnifying glass and began to scrutinize the fake power of attorney. For several minutes, she studied my supposed signature, comparing it to the real documents I had brought. "The forgery is professionally done," she stated, "but there are a few details that give the forgery away. See how the pen pressure here is too even? When a person signs naturally, the intensity of the pressure is constantly changing. And here you can see that the signature was drawn slowly and carefully." Patricia switched to studying the notarization. She pulled a magnifying glass out of a drawer and scrutinized the seal. "Now, this one is quite badly done," she said with satisfaction. "The seal is obviously forged. See those irregularities around the edges? A real seal always has clear borders, and here it looks like it's been scanned and printed. So, it can be proven that the documents are fake?" "Definitely, but that's only the first step. You also have to prove that your sister-in-law is the one behind the fraud." Patricia picked up the purchase agreement and began to study it line by line. Her professional experience allowed her to notice details that had escaped my attention. "Interesting," she muttered, pointing to one of the lines. It says here that the seller warrants the property to be free of encumbrances. But your house has a mortgage that hasn't been paid in full yet? No, we paid it off 5 years ago. Then everything is correct on this side. And here, she pointed to another line, there's an interesting detail. The contract is in standard Florida form, but with a few errors in legal terminology. Whoever drafted this document doesn't know much about real estate law. What does that mean? That your sister-in-law likely didn't act alone. She had an accomplice, but not a very skilled lawyer. Probably some small-time crook who specializes in document forgery. Patricia set the contract aside and took the buyer's information. She turned on her computer and started looking something up on the internet. Richard Thompson, Orlando, she muttered as she typed on the keyboard. Let's see what we can find about this man. She studied the search results for a few minutes, frowning and making notes. That's odd, she said finally. This address in Orlando exists, but it's registered to a dry cleaner, not an apartment building, and there's no person named Richard Thompson at that address in the databases. So the buyer is fictitious too? Looks like it. Either it's another accomplice or your sister-in-law used a front man. Patricia leaned back in her chair and looked at me with a serious look. Rose, I have good and bad news for you. The good news is that the deal is definitely illegal, and we can void it. There's enough documentation to prove fraud in court. And the bad news? The bad is that it will take time, a few months minimum, maybe more. And while the trial is going on, your sister-in-law could abscond with the money or spend it. I felt my heart clench with anxiety. A few months is a long time when $350,000 is involved. What can we do right now? The first thing to do is file a police report. This is a crime, and the sooner the investigation begins, the better chance we have of finding the perpetrators. Then we'll file an urgent motion with the court to stop the transaction and seize the money. Can the money be seized? If it's still in the buyer's or realtor's account, yes. But if your sister-in-law has already had time to withdraw it and transfer it somewhere else, it'll be more difficult. Patricia picked up her cell phone and dialed some number. John, it's Pat Cole. I need an emergency consultation on a real estate fraud case. Yes, today, if possible. She made an appointment and hung up. This is Detective John Rodriguez, an acquaintance of mine from the police department. He specializes in economic crimes. He'll help you file the right report and start a manhunt. I felt hope for the first time in 2 days. Finally, there were professionals around who knew what to do in a situation like this. Patricia, what about my son? If it turns out he was involved in the scam, it's too early to think about that. We need to establish all the facts first. He may not have known anything about his wife's plans. But I could see the doubt in Patricia's eyes. The experienced lawyer realized that it was rare for a wife to pull off such elaborate scams without her husband's knowledge. I'm taking your case, Rose, she said, holding out her hand to me. We'll get your house back and punish the crooks. But you need to be prepared for the process to be long and possibly painful. I'm ready, I replied, shaking her hand. I won't let them steal my life. Patricia smiled. For the first time since we'd met. That's what I've come to expect from you. Your sister-in-law made a big mistake in choosing you as her victim. She thought she was dealing with a defenseless older woman. But she doesn't know the Rose Campbell I remember, smart, strong, and unyielding. The next 2 days flew by like a fever dream. Patricia worked with an incredible speed and efficiency that I remembered from our projects together 30 years ago. On Monday morning, she had already filed an emergency motion with the district court to invalidate the transaction and seize the funds. The judge, after reviewing the evidence of forged documents, scheduled a hearing for Wednesday. Detective Rodriguez was a pleasant man of about 45, with attentive dark eyes and a professional demeanor. He listened to my story, reviewed all the documents, and immediately opened a criminal case under the article of large-scale fraud. In his words, I could hear the confidence of a man who had dealt with such crimes many times. Mrs. Campbell, your sister-in-law has made a serious mistake, he said, closing the folder of documents. She left too many traces: a forged notary seal, a fictitious buyer, bank transfers, all traceable. We usually solve cases like this pretty quickly. I was relieved, letting myself believe for the first time in days that justice would be served. But Tuesday brought new complications neither of us had foreseen. Patricia called me around noon, and I could tell from her voice that something unpleasant had happened. Rose, we have a problem. Realtor Harris just called. He's in a panic. What happened? Turns out he's already spent some of the money from the sale of your house. By law, a realtor is supposed to keep client funds in a special escrow account until the deal is finalized, but Harris broke that rule. My heart thudded. If the money was spent, it would be much harder to get it back. How much did he spend? $75,000. He put it into some investments of his own, expecting to make a quick profit and put the funds back where they belonged. Now those investments have failed and the money is gone. I sank down into my chair, feeling my legs jacking up. Not only had my house been stolen by crooks, now the realtor had turned out to be a crook as well. What's he offering? He's begging me not to sue him, promises to return the money within a month if we give him time. But I don't have much faith in his promises. Patricia, I need some advice. What should we do in this situation? We have two options. We can sue him right away and demand damages, or we can give him a chance to make amends, but under strict supervision. The decision is yours. I hesitated. On the one hand, Harris had violated the law and trust. On the other hand, if he could actually pay the money back, it would save us a long legal battle. Let's give him 2 weeks, I decided, but under written assurances and with daily reports on how the refund is going. Okay, I'll draw up an agreement to that effect. After talking to Patricia, I sat for a long time trying to digest the new information. It turns out that not only Crystal and her accomplices were involved in the theft of my house, but also the realtor who was supposed to protect the interests of all parties to the transaction. The system that was supposed to prevent fraud was itself corrupt. Tuesday night, as I was getting ready for bed, the doorbell rang. When I looked through the peephole, I saw Bradley. My son stood on the porch, nervously shuffling from foot to foot and looking around. He looked awful unshaven, red-eyed, in crumpled clothes. I opened the door, but I didn't invite him in. After everything that had happened, I wasn't sure if he could be trusted. "Mom," he said, and I could hear the desperation in his voice. "I need to talk to you. Where have you been all these days? Why haven't you been answering your cell phone?" "Yeah, I've been on a business trip in Miami, just got back today and found out what happened." He was lying. I could see it in his eyes, the way he couldn't look me in the face. But I decided to give him a chance to explain himself. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. Bradley made his way into the living room and sat on the edge of the couch without taking off his jacket. He looked like he was ready to run away at any moment. "Mom, I know what you're thinking, but I had nothing to do with what Crystal did." "What exactly did Crystal do?" "You know, sold your house, but I swear I didn't know anything about it beforehand." "Then where is she now?" Bradley faltered, clearly making up an answer on the fly. "I don't know. She disappeared 3 days ago. Just packed up and left without saying where." "And you didn't try to find her? Didn't contact the police?" "I did, but they told me she was of age and had the right to go wherever she wanted, and I didn't know about fraud at the time." I looked at my son and saw before me the frightened boy he'd been as a child, when he'd done something wrong and was afraid to admit it. But now he was 32 years old, and the childish excuses looked pathetic. Bradley, tell me the truth. Did you know about Crystal's plans? No, Mom. I would never let her steal from you. You're my mother. Then explain to me why you acted so strangely when I told you about the missing documents. Why did you try to convince me I was wrong? Bradley lowered his head and was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice shook. Because I was afraid. Crystal told me you were starting to get dementia, that you were forgetting things, confusing events. She convinced me to take over your affairs gradually. And did you believe it? Not right away. But when you started talking about the missing documents, I thought she was right, that you really were confusing things. I felt a mixture of anger and pity. Not only had Crystal stolen from me, but she'd been manipulating my son for years, convincing him that I was losing my mind. Bradley, there are no signs of dementia on me. I have regular medical exams, and all the doctors confirm that my mental state is perfectly fine. I know now, when I found out about the sale of the house, I realized Crystal had been lying to me. And the money, $350,000, where is it? I don't know. Crystal took all our savings and disappeared. All she left me was the debts. What debts? Bradley fell silent again, clearly not wanting to answer that question. Bradley, I have a right to know, especially if those debts had anything to do with the theft of my house. We we borrowed money, quite a lot of money. From whom? From one person, not from a bank, a private loan. I felt a chill run down my spine. Private loans often meant ties to crime. How much do you owe? $120,000. The amount stunned me. $120,000 was more than Bradley's salary for 2 years. What did you spend that kind of money on? Crystal wanted to open her own beauty salon, a premium one, for wealthy clients. We took out a loan for a down payment, but the business fell through. Crystal miscalculated the costs. And now you have to pay back $120,000? Yes, and time is running out. If we don't get the money back by the end of the week, Bradley didn't finish, but the point was clear. People who lend at high interest rates are not noted for patience or humanity. Mom, he said, raising pleading eyes to me, I realize I have no right to ask you for help after what happened, but if you don't take a statement from the police, I'll be arrested as an accessory, and then I definitely won't be able to pay you back. And if I take the statement, then what? Crystal goes unpunished? No, we'll find her and get the money back. But it'll take time, and a police investigation will complicate things. I looked at my son and realized he was asking me to choose between justice and his safety. If I continued with the prosecution, he could be arrested as an accomplice, even if he really didn't know anything. And if I don't continue, Crystal could go into hiding forever. Bradley, answer me honestly. Did you really not know about Crystal's plans? Or were you just turning a blind eye because you needed the money? He was silent for a long time, and I could see him struggling with himself. Finally, he lifted his head and looked me in the eye. I suspected she was up to something, but I didn't know what it was. When she asked me to get some of your paperwork for the insurance paperwork, I didn't ask too many questions. So he was involved after all. Maybe not planning the crime, but helping to commit it. My heart clenched with pain and disappointment. Crystal sat in an expensive hotel room in Miami, overlooking the ocean and sipping champagne from a crystal glass. The last 3 days had been like a fairy tale. Designer stores, restaurants, spa treatments she could only dream of while working in a provincial beauty parlor. $350,000 gave a feeling of complete freedom and limitless possibilities. On the bed next to her were the purchases of the last few days. New handbags from Prada and Gucci, jewelry from Tiffany's, designer clothes that before she could only look at in magazines. She'd already spent almost $100,000. but it was still enough money to start a new life somewhere in Europe or the Caribbean. Her phone rang as she tried on a new Versace dress. An unfamiliar number with a Daytona Beach area code popped up on the screen. Crystal hesitated whether to answer, but curiosity took over. Hello? Mrs. Campbell, this is David Harris from the real estate agent. The realtor's voice sounded strained, even panicked, which immediately alerted Crystal. Yes, speaking. We have a serious problem. The deal to sell the house has been canceled. The court has ruled the documents forged. Crystal felt the champagne in her stomach turn into a block of ice. She sank to the edge of the bed, trying to remain calm. What do you mean? The real owner of the house, Rose Campbell, is suing. She claims she never signed the power of attorney for the sale and that the whole deal is a fraud. But we have all the documents. The documents were found to be forged. The forensics show the signature is forged and the notary seal is fake. Crystal's heart raced. The whole carefully planned scam was crumbling like a house of cards. What happens now? You must return all the money immediately, in full. Otherwise, criminal charges will be brought against you. How much time do I have? 48 hours. If the money isn't deposited in the escrow account within 2 days, the case will be turned over to the prosecutor. Harris hung up without even waiting for a response. Crystal sat in stunned silence, looking at the expensive purchases scattered across the bed. Return all the money? But she'd already spent almost a third of it. With trembling fingers, she dialed Bradley's number. The dial tone dragged on interminably, and Crystal began to panic, thinking her husband wouldn't answer. Finally, a familiar voice sounded, tired and concerned. Crystal, where are you? I've been searching for... Brad, we're in trouble. Big problems. What kind of trouble? You disappeared 3 days ago without saying a word. Your mother sued. The deal is void. A long silence followed. Crystal could hear Bradley breathing heavily into the receiver. I knew it, he finally said. I told you this plan was too risky. You told me? You kept quiet like a fish and did everything I asked. Because you convinced me it was the only way to save us from debt. Crystal jumped out of bed and began pacing nervously around the room. Through the large window, she could see the beach full of carefree vacationers, but right now, that image only irritated her. It doesn't matter who said what. What matters is that we have to get the money back within 48 hours. How much money? All of it. 350,000. And how much do we have left? Crystal looked at her purchases and felt her stomach clench with dread. About 250,000. And where's the rest? Yeah, I spent it on necessities. What necessities on $100,000? Bradley's voice turned to a shout, which rarely happened to him. He was usually malleable and avoided conflict, but now his patience was clearly breaking. The clothes, the jewelry, the hotel. I had to look respectable. Respectable? You spent $100,000 on clothes while I'm here dealing with the fallout from your fraud. Don't you dare call it fraud. It was a plan to save our family. Family? What family? You ran away without even warning me. Crystal felt a surge of rage. How dare he rebuke her after all she had done for him? She had risked everything to solve their financial problems, and all he does is complain. What was I supposed to do? Sit around and wait for your mommy to call the police? My mommy? You stole her house. The only thing she had left after her father died. She has $400,000 left in her bank accounts. She could have bought herself 10 houses like that. That's not your money. And a debt of $120,000 isn't my debt? Who took the loan from Morgan? Who signed the papers? You insisted on that loan. You wanted an expensive salon. I wanted a better life for both of us. Crystal stopped in front of the mirror and looked at her reflection. Even in her expensive dress and professional makeup, she looked tired and scared. The luxurious life of the last few days had turned out to be only a temporary illusion. Look, Brad, she said, trying to pull herself together. This isn't the time for mutual recrimination. We need to think about what to do next. Do what? Get the money back, every last dime. But we don't have the whole amount. Then sell your jewelry and designer rags. Crystal looked at her new purchases. Even if she sold everything at half price, it wouldn't cover the missing 100,000. It won't be enough. Then we're screwed. Your mother will sue us, and Morgan will claim his debt. We'll be jailed or killed. Bradley spoke in a breaking voice, and Crystal realized for the first time how serious their situation was. She thought they had time, that they could think this through and find a way out. But there was no time. What if we disappear? She suggested. Go to another country? With what money? And how long can we hide? We have 250,000. That's enough for a few years. Crystal, you don't understand. Both the police and Morgan's men will be after us. Sooner or later, they'll find us. Crystal sank into the chair by the window, feeling all her plans for her new life crumble. $350,000 was supposed to be a ticket to a better future, but instead, it had turned into a death trap. What if I went back and apologized to your mother? She asked, grasping at the last straw. After that message you sent her? Goodbye, you silly old woman. Do you seriously think she's going to forgive you? Crystal remembered that mocking message and realized she had cut off her own escape route. At that moment, she felt like she was done with her old life forever and could afford to say whatever she thought about her mother-in-law. Then, what do you suggest? I don't know. Maybe if I talk to Mom one-on-one, explain that you were desperate. She'll never forgive me. You know how she treated me. She treated you normally. Normal? She thought I was a gold digger after your money. I don't have any money. But your parents did. And she knew perfectly well I was counting on it. Bradley fell silent, and Crystal realized she'd hit the mark. Rose had indeed always been suspicious of her, feeling that the young wife was not only interested in her son, but also in the family finances. Anyway, we need to deal with the problem right now, Bradley finally said. Where are you located? In Miami. Come home. We'll think together. What if I get arrested at the airport? There's no arrest warrant yet, but if you don't come back voluntarily, it'll only make things worse. Crystal looked out at the sunset over the ocean, realizing that this could be the last beautiful view of her life for a long time. Court, jail, or worse, loomed ahead if Morgan's men got to them first. I'm flying out tomorrow morning, she said into the phone. Good. I'll meet you at the airport. Brad. What? I'm sorry. I thought I was doing what was best for both of us. Bradley was silent for a long time, and when he spoke again, his voice sounded tired and frustrated. Crystal, the problem isn't that you wanted a better life. The problem is that you chose to steal it from my mother. The court hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning at 10 o'clock. I woke up early, around 6, though I'd been wide awake the night before with worry and anxious thoughts. It was drizzling outside the window, which seemed symbolic. Even the weather reflected the bleakness of what was happening. The last few days had turned my humdrum life into a nightmare of legal procedures, police interrogations, and family drama. Patricia picked me up at 9:30. She looked confident and professional in a strict black suit with a folder of documents under her arm. Her calmness put me at ease a little, too, though there was still a storm of emotions raging inside. Ready? She asked, helping me into the car. As ready as you can be for something like this, I replied, adjusting my best dark blue dress. The drive to the courthouse took 20 minutes. Patricia used that time to further instruct me on how to conduct myself at the hearing, what questions might be asked, and how to answer them. Her professional experience and confidence gave me strength, but I was still nervous. The county courthouse was an imposing red brick structure with white columns, built in the early 20th century. As I walked up the marble steps, I thought about the fact that these walls had seen thousands of human dramas, and today my story would be one more drop in the ocean of litigation. Realtor Harris and his lawyer, Detective Rodriguez, and a few other people I didn't know were already in the courtroom. Harris looked extremely depressed and avoided looking in my direction. Apparently, the realization that his own misconduct had made the situation worse was weighing heavily on him. Judge Margaret Wilson was a woman in her 50s, with shrewd gray eyes and a stern but fair expression. She scrutinized all the documents presented, listened to the testimony of the expert handwriting experts who confirmed the forgery of my signature, and the opinion of the Morrison notary that his seal had been used without authorization. In view of the evidence presented, said the judge, the court finds the sale invalid. The documents submitted as a power of attorney are forgeries. Mrs. Rose Campbell is the rightful owner of the disputed property. I felt a huge sense of relief. My house was coming back to me. But the judge continued. In addition, the court orders the defendant Crystal Campbell to pay full damages in the amount of $350,000 within 30 days. Failure to comply with this order will result in the case being transferred to the criminal court for prosecution for grand jury fraud. Patricia squeezed my hand, smiling. We had won. Justice had been served, at least in the legal sense. But I realized that the hardest part was still to come, getting the money from Crystal and dealing with the family disaster. After the hearing, Patricia and I went to a cafe near the courthouse to discuss the next steps. She ordered coffee, I ordered tea with lemon. I needed something soothing after all the excitement I had experienced. What now? I asked, stirring the sugar in my tea. Now we wait. Crystal has 30 days to return the money. If she doesn't, criminal prosecution will begin. And if she can't return it, or if she absconds, then we'll go to the bailiffs for enforcement. We can seize her property, block her accounts, and if she tries to abscond, we'll put her on a federal wanted list. We finished our coffee and drove back to my house. On the way, Patricia talked about the technical aspects of enforcing the judgment, but I listened half-heartedly. My thoughts were occupied with other things: how to deal with my son, whether it would ever be possible to restore family ties. At home, I was in for a surprise. Sitting on the porch were Bradley and Crystal. They looked like a pair of runaways, tired, disheveled, with large bags at their feet. Crystal was crying, smearing mascara on her cheeks, and Bradley was smoking nervously, something he only did when he was extremely stressed. Mom, Bradley said, standing up as we approached, we need to talk. After what happened in court, we do have a lot to talk about, I replied, pulling out my house keys. Crystal stood up, shakily. She was clearly in a state of nervous breakdown. Red eyes, trembling hands, confused expression. The expensive clothes I'd last seen her in had been replaced by simple jeans and a worn jacket. Rose, she began in a broken voice, I know what I did was awful. I know I don't deserve to be forgiven, but please, please give me a chance to make it right. Make it right? You stole my house and abused me. I was desperate. We had such debts, such problems. I didn't know what to do. Patricia stood beside me, ready to intervene if necessary, but I decided to hear my sister-in-law out to the end. Crystal, the court has ordered you to return all the money within 30 days. Can you do that? I can't, she whispered. I've spent almost $100,000. I have the rest, but it's not enough. Then you'll be put in jail. Rose, please. Crystal dropped to her knees right on the wet steps. I'm willing to work, give you my entire paycheck. Do anything, but don't ruin my life. The sight was pathetic and repulsive at the same time. The woman who a few days ago had called me a silly old woman was now crawling at my feet, begging for mercy. Stand up, I said. Don't humiliate yourself further. Bradley helped his wife up, putting his arm around her shoulders. On his face, I saw a mixture of shame and despair. Mom, I know what Crystal did was wrong, but she's my wife, and I can't leave her in the lurch. And you can leave me, your own mother? You don't understand. We have a debt to some very dangerous people. If we don't pay back the money, we'll be killed. That's not my problem, Bradley. But we are your family. I looked at my son and daughter-in-law standing in front of me in despair and tried to find a shred of sympathy in my heart. But there was only the pain of betrayal and the bitterness of disappointment. Family doesn't steal houses from parents, I said quietly. Family doesn't call each other silly old women. I didn't think what I wrote, exclaimed Crystal. I was scared, confused. You thought exactly what you wrote. For the first time in 8 years, you showed your real face. Crystal cried again, but now her tears made me feel nothing but tired. I was tired of dramas, of emotions, of having to make decisions that would change people's lives. Mom, Bradley said, and there was a new note in his voice. Accusation. Do you really want to send my wife to prison? Are you willing to destroy our family over money? Not over money, but over principles. What principles? The principle of revenge? The principle of justice. Bradley let go of his wife and took a step toward me. I saw something in his eyes that had never been there before, anger directed at me. You know what, Mom? Maybe Crystal was right about you. Maybe you really have become cruel and callous. Those words hit me harder than any of Crystal's insults. This was my son speaking, my only child who I loved no matter what. Bradley, no, let me finish. All my life you've been controlling me, telling me what to do, how to live my life. And when I finally found a woman who loves me, you did everything you could to destroy our relationship. I never tried to destroy your relationship. You were constantly criticizing Crystal, making comments, treating her like a stranger, because you felt she wasn't being genuine with us. And now you're willing to send her to prison just to prove you were right. As I stood in the drizzling rain listening to my son's accusations, feeling the last thing I had left, our relationship, crumbling. Crystal had stolen my home, but Bradley had stolen something more precious, my belief that family bonds could survive any adversity. If you think I'm such a bad mother, I said, trying to maintain my dignity, then why don't you both leave, start a new life without a cruel old woman? We probably will, Bradley replied coldly, as soon as we get our debts sorted out. He took Crystal's hand and headed for the car. My sister-in-law turned around to say goodbye, and in her eyes I saw not remorse, but anger. She blamed me for her failures, not herself. Mom, Bradley said, pulling up in front of the car, you have a month to change your mind. If you don't expect us to ever come back. The car drove off, leaving me standing in the rain next to Patricia. My lawyer was delicately silent, realizing that any words of comfort would be inappropriate right now. Let's go home, I said finally. The house was quiet and empty. Patricia made tea and sat next to me on the couch. Don't you think you're being too cruel? She asked cautiously. What am I supposed to do? Forgive the theft? Forget the insults? They're your family. Were my family. Now I'm not so sure. Patricia nodded, realizing the decision was final. The month that the court gave Crystal to pay the money back dragged on for an excruciatingly long time. Every day I waited for Patricia to call with the news, checking the mail, listening to every rustle outside the house. But the first 3 weeks passed in complete silence. No sign of Bradley or Crystal, as if they'd vanished into thin air. I tried to live a normal life, but the constant tension made itself felt. I slept poorly at night, and during the day, I often found myself standing at the window, staring out at the street, waiting to see my son's familiar car. The neighbors treated me with a special sensitivity. Apparently, rumors of the family scandal had already spread throughout the neighborhood. Mrs. Patterson came to visit a few times on the pretext of bringing vegetables from her garden, but I saw curiosity and sympathy in her eyes. She cautiously inquired about my affairs and offered to help me, but I was careful not to go into details. It was pleasant, but it could not fill the void left by my separation from my only son. On the 27th day of the month given by the court to return the money, Patricia called with unexpected news. "Rose, they've started refunding the money," she said. "$50,000 went into the escrow account today." I felt a mixture of relief and surprise. So Crystal had decided to comply with the court's demands after all, rather than flee from justice. Where did they get that amount of money? According to the paperwork, it's the proceeds from the sale of an automobile, a 2021-year-old BMW. Crystal's car, her pride and joy, the one she'd bought on credit 2 years ago and constantly coddled like an expensive toy. Apparently, the situation had indeed become critical if she had decided to part with the car. Over the next 3 days, other sums came into the account: 10,000, 15, 25. Patricia tracked each transfer and gave me the details. The money came from various jewelry stores and pawn shops. Apparently, Crystal was selling off her jewelry and expensive purchases. "She sells everything," Patricia stated during our phone conversation Wednesday. "Jewelry, designer handbags, even her wedding ring." Picturing my ex-sister-in-law running around pawn shops with bags of expensive items gave me strange feelings. On the one hand, it was just retribution for her greed and deceit. On the other hand, I couldn't help but feel a certain pity for a woman who was losing everything she considered important in her life. By the end of the week, $200,000 had been deposited into the account, but there was still $150,000 short of the full amount. Time was running short, and I was beginning to wonder if Crystal would be able to raise the full amount. Saturday morning, Bradley came to my house. I hadn't seen my son in a month, and I was struck by his appearance. He was thin, gaunt, his eyes sunken, and his face had deep wrinkles that had never been there before. He was dressed in old jeans and a worn shirt, a far cry from the style I'd grown accustomed to watching him over the past few years. "Mom," he said, entering the house uninvited, "we need to talk." "About what?" I replied, not offering him a seat. "About money. We've raised almost the full amount, but we're $100,000 short. That's your problem, not mine." Bradley strode into the living room and sank heavily into a chair. He looked like he hadn't slept in days straight. "Mom, I know what we did was wrong. I know we deserve to be punished, but we've really changed. Crystal sold all her jewelry. I got a second job. And what do you want me to do? Help us with the last part of our debt. Loan us 100 grand. I looked at my son and saw the same desperation in his eyes that had been in Crystal's a month ago, but it didn't make me sympathetic now. "Bradley, you're asking me to loan money to people who've already ripped me off once. We'll pay it back. I'll sign any paperwork, give any guarantees." "What guarantees? You have no house, no car, no savings." "I have a job. At your salary of $100,000, you'll be paying it back for 20 years. Bradley was silent, realizing it was useless to argue. Finally, he raised his head and looked at me with an expression I couldn't define. "Mom, if we don't pay back the full amount by Monday, Crystal will go to trial. She'll go to jail for at least 5 years. She deserves it." "What about me? Do I deserve to be without a wife?" You made your own choice a month ago when you sided with her. Bradley stood up and headed for the exit. At the door, he turned around and said, "You know, Mom, Crystal was right. You really have gotten callous." After he left, I sat in silence for a long time, pondering what I had heard. Had I really become as cruel as they claimed? Or had I just learned to protect myself from people who wanted to use me? Monday morning, Patricia called with a final report. "Rose, they've raised $280,000. It's 70,000 short. What does that mean? That the case is being turned over to the DA. Crystal will be arrested for fraud. And Bradley? So far, there's not enough evidence of his direct involvement. But if the investigation finds new facts, I realized that my son could end up on trial, too. That worried me more than Crystal's fate. On Tuesday, Detective Rodriguez announced that Crystal had been arrested and was being held in custody pending trial. Bail was set at $100,000, an amount they clearly didn't have. On Wednesday, Bradley came to my house again. He looked even worse than he had on Saturday and immediately began begging for help. "Mom, please help bail me out. Crystal is sitting in jail like a criminal." "She is a criminal. She's my wife." "Who stole my house." Bradley slumped down on the couch and covered his face with his hands. I saw his shoulders shake and realized he was crying. The last time I'd seen my son cry was when he was 12 and we divorced his father. "Mom," he said without lifting his head, "I lost my job. I was laid off when they found out about my wife's arrest." This news upset me. Whatever our relationship, Bradley was still my son, and his suffering hurt me. "You'll find another job. Who needs a computer programmer whose wife is locked up for fraud?" He looked up, and I could see how much he'd changed in the last month. He was no longer the cocky young man I knew, but a broken man who had lost everything. "We moved into a studio apartment on the outskirts," he continued. "We rent for $300 a month. We have no furniture, no car, no money for food. These are the consequences of your actions. Mother, I beg of you. I will never ask you for help again. But right now, give me a chance to right the wrongs." I looked at my son and felt the motherly love and sense of justice struggling inside me. Part of me wanted to hug him, to forgive him, to help him. But the other part remembered Crystal's taunting message, the betrayal, the pain of broken trust. "Bradley, even if I gave you bail money, what would change? Crystal will still go to trial. At least she'll be home while the trial goes on, and then we'll see. And then you'll go back to living on debt and looking for easy ways to get rich? No, we've realized our mistakes." I stood up and walked to the window. It was fall outside. The trees were yellowing and the leaves were falling. In a few months, it would be the 1-year anniversary of Frank's death, and I still hadn't gotten used to being alone. "No, Bradley," I said without turning around. "I won't help people who betrayed me." My son left without a word. A week later, he sent a quick text saying that he and Crystal were moving to another state where no one knew about their problems. That was the last I heard from him. The house came back to me officially a month after Crystal's arrest. Patricia had brought all the paperwork to prove my ownership. I held the papers in my hands and realized that I had won the war, but lost my family. Now I lived alone in a house where laughter once sounded, where family gathered for holidays, where plans for the future were made. The room seemed too big and empty. The silence pressed on my ears, but I knew I had done the right thing. Sometimes principles are more important than family ties, and justice is more important than peace. In the evenings, I sat in Frank's chair and thought about how quickly life could change. 6 months ago, I was a happy wife and mother who believed in the strength of family relationships. Now I was alone, but with no illusions about the people I thought were closest to me.